On today's episode of the Atari 7800 Game by Game podcast, we will be talking about CX7821 Choplifter and CX7822 Karateka. Or is it Karateka? Or Karateka? Or care not what it is? Whatever. No matter what you call it, the game really stinks, doesn't it?
Hey guys, welcome to episode 10 of the Atari 7800 Game by Game podcast. Can you believe it? We've hit double digits. My name's Phil and I'm your host. Before I get to some of my intro, I just want to say that we have another addition to the incompatibility list to the 7800, and that is one of today's games, Choplifter, and I found this out firsthand. I have a system that I use that I play most of the time. I also use it for most of my reviews when I do 7800 or 2600 games on the No Swear Gamer YouTube channel. And what happened was I put in my copy of Choplifter and it was glitching out terrible. You could still play the game, but it was like everything was shrunk in half and looked really weird, but it would also occasionally flicker back into the right perspective graphic wise and then go right back to the half-sized ugly looking graphics. And I did some research on this and I found a couple threads on Atari Age that talked about this, and putting two and two together, taking apart here and apart there, here's what I think what happens. There's certain revisions of the 7800, not most of them, but there's certain of them, and evidently I have one of them, where if you plug in a certain version of Choplifter, you will get the glitches I described in various forms. And what I think it is, from what I read, now I'm not going to crack open my cartridge, but what I think it is there's a transistor on the cartridge itself that reacts badly. Here's the interesting thing. First of all, I know this copy's good because I thankfully have another 7800 laying around. I plugged it into that, played perfectly fine. So it's not the cartridge. And of course, my system plays other 7800 and 2600 games really well. This is the first time I ever had any issues with any incompatibility as far as games go. All the 2600 games haven't given me a problem yet. So I did some homework. Here's what I think it is. It's the 1987 version of Choplifter in these certain versions of 7800 systems. And so if you're out there and you're thinking about getting a Choplifter, from what I understand, now I don't have a copy to test this out on the system, but from what I understand, the 1988 releases of Choplifter don't give you the same problem. So if you're looking for Choplifter and you're not sure if it's going to be incompatible or not, look for a 1988 release on the cartridge. You'll say that if you're like on eBay and you can zoom in on the picture, look to see if it says 1988 on the cartridge label rather than 1987. This is one of those few times where it's really awesome that Atari changed the copyright year every year on the cartridges themselves. So find a 1988 copy and you'll probably be good to go. I'm not 100% sure. I haven't tested it out. If I ever get a 1988 copy, I will let you know what happens. But if I was you, that's what I would do. And conversely, if you get a copy of Choplifter and you're getting some weird graphics, it may just be your system and not the cartridge itself, sad to say. So so there you go, Choplifter. It's another one of the 7800 games that sometimes has problems on some of the 7800 systems like Food Fight. All right, so anyways, on to today's formal introductions. First of all, congratulations to Ferg of the Atari 2600 Game by Game podcast. If it wasn't for that podcast, this one most likely would have never existed, at least not in this form. I am very, very grateful to Ferg for all his help and inspiration, and he had episode 100, and it is a doozy. It's over 3 hours long, but it's worth it. He did his first interview with David Crane. How about that for your first interview? The creator of Pitfall and many other video games as well, and he really did a bang-up job. So check that out, episode 100 of the Atari 2600 Game by Game podcast. Congratulations again, Ferg. Wow, 100 episodes. How does it feel? Has it fully sunk in yet? And I also want to congratulate Lewis, who won my first listener of the month's contest. Now, I think what I'm going to do is every other month I'm going to do another one of these contests. Because that would be about 4 episodes, which is, if I was weekly, that would be a month. So that gives time for people to enter. And if you don't know what it is if you send me an audio or a text submission to Atari 7800 Game by Game Podcast at AOL.com. That's the only way you can enter. If you send me an audio or text submission that way, I will put you into a drawing. You get one entry if you get a text submission used on the show, or two entries if an audio submission is on a show. So you can earn up to two submissions per show, two entries per show. And then at the end of the time frame, I do a random drawing. I assign every one of the submissions numbers, and I do a random drawing. And this time, Lewis, who I believe it was for a submission he sent on Galaga, won, and he picked Joust for the Atari 7800. So I sent him Joust. I also sent him a Sport Flick card. If you don't know what Sport Flick baseball cards are, I think it was like 80s, maybe 90s. There were these baseball cards where if you turned them, you can actually see the guy in the baseball card move. They're slightly thicker. And since he was in California, I picked an Oakland Athletics card, and it turns out he's a fan of the Oakland A's. So that was lucky there, because, I could have went like San Francisco Giants or the Dodgers or something like that as well. But turned out to be just the right selection. That was just an extra bonus I sent to him. So enjoy the game, Lewis. Let's see, what are the games I have for you to earn this month? Well, this month, it looks like I have a copy of Space Invaders for the 2600, Defender for the 2600, Asteroids for the 2600, Math Grand Prix for the 2600. I also have two 7800 games. So let's see, that would be a Galaga for the 7800 and Food Fight for the 7800, two solid titles there. So the winner this time around will get to pick one of those games, or I also have an Atari Advantage 7800 edition poster that used to get bundled with some of the games when you bought them new. So if you'd rather have the poster, you could have that instead. Now, this is only open to U.S. residents. I'm just sending it somewhere in the continental U.S., or I guess, Hawaii and Alaska, that's fine too, or Army bases, I think that counts. But I'm just sending it regular U.S. first class mail. So if you want to enter that contest, just keep on sending your audio and text submissions to Atari 7800 podcast at AOL.com. That's Atari 7800 podcast at AOL.com. Next up, I tried out my Edladdin Super Twin controller, and that thing is amazing when it comes to Robotron 2084. So here's what I did. First, I played a game, I think it was on the intermediate levels. I played a game with the standard Proline controller. And I did okay. I'm not an expert at this game. Don't have a lot of experience with the 7800 version. Played it a few times, not a lot. Then I immediately went to the Super Twin. And wow, not only did my score improve greatly, and I'm not going to tell you how much, because I might use that information for contests. So you might want to turn into the next episode to see what the contest is and what I'm giving away. But I'm not going to tell you how much my score improved, but I will tell you this. It was a blast. I had a lot of fun. When you have that twin stick, it really makes a difference. I think if you are a fan of twin stick games, you will probably understand this. Maybe you're a fan of Super or a fan of Smash TV, but you played it on a home system where you had to use one controller. It's not as fun. It just takes a lot. It's like playing Duck Hunt with a NES controller rather than the Zapper. It's just not designed to do that. But when you have the Super Twin, it's just a blast. And it still doesn't make me the best player in the world, but I had a lot more fun. Even if my score didn't improve, I just enjoyed it a whole lot more. It turned a game into something that I probably wouldn't play again if I didn't have it, into a game I would play again if I had a Super Twin at home all the time. So if you are a Robotron 2084 fan and you are interested in getting a true setup, look into Edladdin.com at that controller. It does cost quite a bit of money, but it is solidly built. It's worth it. You're paying for quality, and you get quality with this joystick. Now, you can also use them independently. So what it does is it has two, kind of joystick cords one that goes into the first person port, one that goes into the second person. So theoretically, you could use it for two-player games, one person on each joystick. The buttons are on top of each other. I haven't really tried it out as with just a regular game to see how it would be to play it. So I am curious in that. The joysticks are laid pretty close to each other. So if you played it two players on a different game, you would be pretty close for comfort, but it's definitely possible. And I'm going to try it out later on just some regular Atari 7800 games and maybe some 2600 games as well, just to see how it works as an arcade joystick for one player as well. Because you can use it like that. I just haven't had the time. I've been very, very busy getting ready for this week's show. But thanks again, Edladdin, for loaning that out to me. And tune in next episode to see Hopefully by then I'll have some information on a contest and a prize to announce as well. Okay, before we get to the games, I want to talk part numbers just for a little bit. Ferg touched on this last time, and I've been trying to keep up with this. I think I did it in the Winter Games episode, but I want to kind of highlight when we go over games that had a part number, or we miss a part number, we skip a part number, and tell you what those games were supposed to be if I can find out that information. So what happened last week was the first game I covered was CX-11 Desert Falcon. Then after that was I did Ball Blazer, which is CX-7815. So what was in between that? Well, after Desert Falcon, the next part number, CX-7812, was supposed to be Millipede, which was also an April Fool's joke this past year on Atari Age. Then CX-7813 was supposed to be a 7800 version of Junior Pac-Man. That would have been interesting. And then CX-7814 was Track and Field, which was one of the early titles mentioned back before the first release in 1984, but it never saw the light of day. And then, of course, we had Ball Blazer 7815. So what was now, okay, so next up is going to be CX-21 Choplifter. So we're skipping a bunch of numbers. So what came after Ball Blazer part number wise? Well, CX-7816 was supposed to be Rescue on Fractalis, which was supposed to be another Lucasfilm Games, and I believe it was it released on the 5200? It may have been released on the 5200. I know it was released on some computers, and it would have been really interesting to see that on the 7800. And I believe someone found a prototype of that, though I haven't seen that in video form yet. CX-7817 was supposed to be Crystal Castles, and I understand a lot of people like the 2600 version of Crystal Castles, which is interesting because I think it was supposed to be a trackball game, and those don't always translate well to the joystick controller, even though there was a trackball made for the system. It's not an arcade trackball, but you can still play trackball games. CX-7818 was supposed to be Moon Patrol, which I believe someone, maybe it was Bob DeCrescenzo, who turned it into a homebrew. I can't remember off the top of my head. CX-7819 was supposed to be Stargate, which is also known as Defender 2. So what you're seeing here is a lot of titles with these last three that GCC made for the 2600. They're probably going to work on them for the 7800 as well, but after the sale of Atari in 84, the contract fell through, and so it never got finished. So Defender 2 could have been on the 7800. CX-7820 is unknown. I couldn't find that. And then we get to the next two games, Choplifter and Karateka, which are CX-7821 and CX-7822. Before I get to the games Choplifter and Karateka or Karateka, however you want to pronounce it, I thought I'd go over the company that originally brought both of them out. Yeah, these both share the same company that brought them to computers initially. That company is called Broederbund. Now, most people call it Broederbund, but doing my research, it turns out you're supposed to say Broederbund, like a brood, when you start out saying it. So let's go on with the history of Broederbund. In 1979, Doug Carlston, a lawyer, made a strategy computer game for the TRS-80 called Galactic Empire. Now, when it became evident that he had a sellable game on his hands, he and his brother Doug, who taught Swedish in an American college, founded Broederbund. Now, Broederbund was named after a group of merchants in Galactic Empire that meant an association of brothers. However, this was also the name of a real-life South African secret society that was associated with white supremacy. So in order to distance themselves from that group, they changed the spelling and added a slash to the O, which was a reference to slashed zeros often found in early computing. They also used a 3-crown logo, which was a reference to the coat of arms of Sweden. Broederbund quickly grew due to their production of several popular titles, including Choplifter in 1982, Lode Runner and Spelunker in 1983, Carmen Sandiego series that began in 1985, Prince of Persia in 1989, the Print Shop Productivity Software series that started in 1991, and one of the most popular games of all time, Myst, in 1993, which really helped get the CD-ROM format off the ground. Broederbund also got into the home video game market, publishing on the Nintendo Entertainment System with some titles such as Lode Runner, Battle of Olympus, and The Guardian Legend. In 1995, Broderbund tried to purchase the Learning Company, but it was outbid by a company named Softkey, who took the Learning Company name when they bought it. Ironically, 3 years later, the new Learning Company would end up buying Broderbund for $420 million in stock. And in 1999, Mattel, who gave us the Intellivision, bought the Learning Company, which included Broderbund for $3.6 billion. Now, if that sounds like a big financial mistake, that's because it was. Mattel basically gave the Learning Company away to Gore's Technology Group for a share of whatever they could get selling it. And in 2001, the productivity side of the Learning Company, which includes the print shop, was sold to a company called River Deep, while the game portion was sold to Ubisoft, who would continue to release games that originally started with Broderbund, like Myst and Prince of Persia on some of the next generation systems. The Broderbund name is still used today by River Deep, the productivity side. And while they do put out some games, none of them are related to the Broderbund titles because that went to Ubisoft. So some of the productivity software, however, is still with them. So you can still buy the latest edition of Print Shop if you wish. And that is the history of the company. So now let's go on to the first game of the day, and that is Choplifter. Choplifter originally started as a 1982 Apple II game made by Dan Gorlin. It was made in 6 months and pretty much started as an accident. Dan borrowed an Apple II from his grandfather while they were trying to sell his house. He began making the game out of sheer boredom that dealt with his interest in helicopters. A local kid suggested adding people to rescue like they did in the then popular Defender. He would later dabble in making some more games, but ended up going back to his first love, African music and dance, which he still does to this day. In Choplifter, you use a helicopter to rescue hostages from the bungling Empire, who would also show up in other Broderbund games such as Lode Runner and Raid on Bungling Bay. The original game took place during night. Now, the original Choplifter also appeared on many platforms such as the Atari 5200, the 8-bit computers from Atari, the Atari XE, the ColecoVision, and the Commodore 64, to name some. In 1985, Sega licensed the game to make an arcade version that added a different scoring system, different settings, parallax scrolling, and a fuel gauge, among other things. This marks one of the few times that a game started as a computer game and later became an arcade game. Sega did something similar with Pitfall 2, which started as a console game and later became an arcade game through Sega. The arcade version of Choplifter was ported to the Sega Master System and the Famicom, which is the Japanese Nintendo. So basically, those versions are a port of a port. A remake, Choplifter HD, was released on Xbox Live and the PlayStation Network in 2012. There was a Choplifter 2 released on the Game Boy in 1991 and remade for the Game Gear as Choplifter 3 in 1994. A different Choplifter 3 was released on the Super Nintendo in 1994 as well. In 1992, Sega made a 3D spiritual successor called Air Rescue for the arcade and released an Air Rescue for the Master System as well in foreign countries that was more of a 2D game rather than the 3D game that was in the arcade. Choplifter was released for the Atari 7800 originally in 1987. It was programmed, according to AtariProtos.com, by Jack Sandberg for iBid Inc. Now, iBid Inc. has a bad history with games for the Atari 7800. They produced Hat Trick, which is a pretty terrible game, Choplifter, Karateka, and also Gato, which never got released. But a lot of those games get criticized. Now, Jack Sandberg was given credit on Atari Protos. He may have also done Karateka, but it's also possible, from what I understand, that there may have been a team behind it. It may not have just been him. So all these games do have something in common. The box is a nice full color box. This is not labeled a Super Game cartridge. We had It's sandwiched the part number between a lot of Super Game cartridges, but because Super Game cartridges are supposed to be like the first time on a home system, maybe because this already appeared on the ColecoVision, they didn't call it a Super Game cartridge. But anyways, the box has some really nice cover art. It's nighttime, so this may have been based on one of the computer boxes. And originally, I think the computer boxes, maybe for both of these games, was done by Mark Erickson. I'm not sure, but he's the guy who did the Galaga box on the 7800. So it's nighttime. There's a Choplifter, there's Choplifter on the top. It says with its exclamation point in kind of a military style font, kind of the A-Team style font, a little bit, not completely. But you have a helicopter coming down with the pilot and another guy lowering a rope. You can see what appears to be a pink fighter jet shooting machine guns in the background. And you can see a bunch of guys on the ground. It looks like they're in like a concentration camp of some sort. You got the barbed wire fences and the guard towers and some lights. And you have the sand background, a tank in the background also firing off. You see a building way in the back on fire and a bunch of guys who look like businessmen because they're all in khaki pants and like these buttoned up dress shirts. Because, you know, if you were in a POW camp, you'd be wearing khakis and dress shirts. But they're all looking in different areas, waiting to get on. There's one guy who's like grabbing to the helicopter as well. The back of the box says, "Rescue the hostages," and it gives you one screenshot that looks like it's an actual screenshot from the game. It says, "Problems again. This time the bunglings nabbed 64 of our people. You got to bring them back alive. Zoom your rescue chopper into enemy territory. Test your reflexes and strategy skills as you dodge tanks, fighters, and air mines. You got so little time, and the hostages are desperate. Go for it. Single player action, 3 perilous sorties, ground and air combat for use with the Atari 7800 series systems, for use with the North American or any other NTSC television set only." And I think this is the first game that makes that distinction between the North American sets, and for use with the 7800 controller. The manual is a 4-page black and white with a little bit of red manual. It's folded. And of course, on the cover, you have a black and white version of the cover art. And inside the manual, it says this: "The evil bunglings have kidnapped 64 of our delegates from the World Peace Conference. You must save them. The delegates are imprisoned in the bungling stronghold, but we've got a secret base nearby, disguised as a post office." Okay, so if they're in the bungling territory, the post office in the game that's supposed to be has a gigantic American flag over it. That's not suspicious at all. You've already smuggled in a helicopter. How do you smuggle in a helicopter fully armored with a machine gun and bombs? I'm sure it's possible. It's just funny to read. You're ready to fly it into enemy territory, snatch the hostages from their prison barracks, and speed them to safety. But be careful, the bungling forces are on alert, just waiting to shoot you down. You'll need speed and skill to get past them and save the hostages, but you can do it! And it tells you about setting up your system. It says press either button to start play. During the play, of course, you can pause or reset and start a game. There is no game selection. It's one game. There's no difficulty to select at all. So basically anything you do with the controller will start your game. Playing the game. The 64 hostages are locked in 4 bungling prison barracks, 16 hostages per barrack. You must rescue them in your helicopter and fly them to safety. Your mission is divided into 3 sorties, and I don't know if I'm saying that right. I'm sorry. With 1 chopper per sortie. I think that's French for try. I'm not sure. When a sortie begins, your helicopter is revving up on the pad. When the music ends, move the controller handle forward to lift off. Then move the handle left or right diagonally to fly in that direction. Release the handle to land. I thought you had to push it down to land. While flying, press the right control button to change directions you're facing. As you press the button, you will alternate facing right, forward, or left. Press the left controller button to fire your chopper's machine gun or drop bombs. When the chopper is facing sideways, the machine gun will fire. Use this on airborne targets and to shoot open barracks. To drop bombs on ground attackers, face forward and press the left button. Once in the air, You'll have to fight off the bungling ground and air forces to get close to the barracks. Shoot open the barracks to free the hostages, then land the helicopter so they can scramble in. You can fit up to 16 hostages at once inside the chopper. Retreat to the post office and descend. You must land on the pad in order for the hostages to climb out. Then return to the battle zone for more action. Battle Zone, that's like the Atari game. So when you're shooting those tanks, are those some of the tanks from the arcade game Battle Zone? Food for thought. If your chopper is shot down, another appears at the post office. I just love how they say post office. That's hilarious to me. Until all your choppers are lost. Choplifter ends when you lose your third helicopter, when all the hostages are rescued or lost. And then it shows you the bunglings. The tanks will shoot your helicopter if you landed or are near the ground. The turrets track your choppers, then fire. They also shoot at open barracks and then shoot the hostages as they run. So basically what happens is the tank will aim at you, but if it lands where the shot lands, it lands on the ground. If it lands on a hostage or a barrack, it'll destroy either one. Jet fighters charge at you, shooting air-to-air missiles. Drone air mines home in on your chopper. These kind of look like big balloons with weird attachments. When they make contact, you crash. Survival tips. Maneuver your chopper high to bomb tanks while avoiding their fire. You can shoot down air-to-air missiles, but it's safer and quicker to dodge them. Don't land on the hostages. That squashes them. Don't shoot them either. I really like how they have to tell you that, but it is true. If you land on them, you will kill them. And these guys these prisoners are kind of dumb. At least some of them are, because they will stand right under your helicopter as it comes straight down. Like you'll be coming straight down, and some of them will run right in your way, and you have to move. It shows you the scoring screen that's at the top. The left score, there's a left score, middle score, and right score. The left score shows you the hostages lost. The middle score shows you the hostages inside the chopper. And the right score shows you the hostages rescued. And the highest possible score for the rescued hostages is 64. And that's the manual. The cartridge is a very nice looking color version of the label art. I really like the color version of the Atari 7800 cartridges. I think they look really sharp. Graphically speaking, well, there's some parallax scrolling in the background, so that's kind of impressive, but there's not much to the background. It's just like plain blue skies and some clouds. I thought the helicopter looks pretty decent. You could tell what everything is. The post office kind of looks like a combination schoolhouse, and I don't know. I guess a post office makes sense with a huge flag overhand. I did like how in some versions of Choplifter you have, I think it's like sandbags in between the landing pad and the barracks and all the enemies. But instead of sandbags, they have Atari Fuji symbols. I thought that was kind of cool. So there's some interesting thing in the graphics, but there's nothing really that great, at least in my opinion. There's little musical ditties you hear, including when you take off, you hear the battle, part of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And you hear little ditties when you die and when the game initially starts. But other than that, there's just some sound effects. I thought the chopper sound was pretty good. But again, like the graphics, really, it didn't really do much to impress me. Rarity-wise, Atari Age and Digital Press actually agree. They both give it a 2 out of 10, meaning it's pretty common for the most part. On eBay, loose copies were going for about $8. Complete copies were going for about $10, and new copies were going around $12. Of course, it depends when you buy it. I saw some new copies going for like $9. And as always, that includes the shipping. The average score reviews for external reviews on Atari Age, there were 6 of them for a 77% average, which I guess isn't too bad. The high was 88, the low was 60. As far as the Atari Age High Score Club goes, there was 3 people, Atarian 76, Liduario, and Mord, who saved all 64 people. And that's basically it. It's one level, and it's save as many people as you can. Oh, and on the graphics as well, in some versions of the game, the tanks will kind of come out of the background into the foreground instead of just come from the left or the right, but this version doesn't do that. The tanks just come from either side. And I did not have this as a kid. I was interested as a kid. The screenshots looked interesting to me, but I never did pick it up until today. So that's Choplifter. Let's go ahead and move on to Karateka or Karateka or whatever. Now for Karateka or Karateka, and I think that's how the author Jordan Mechner says you pronounce it as Karateka. I could be mistaken there, but I did post a video on my Facebook page and some other places as well that showed him discussing how you pronounce it, and in the end what he says was, say it however you want. So I may switch with how I say the game from time to time, bear with me, but I shall do my best as we go on. All right, so Karateka is a 1984 game, and as I said, it's by a guy named Jordan Mechner, who would later go on to make the Prince of Persia series. And if you're familiar with both games, you can kind of see how they're related with the animation and so on and so forth. Came out in 1984 originally on the Apple II. The way it started was this. Jordan was kind of dabbling in making games as I believe he was a freshman in Yale when he started. And he sent a version of Asteroids that he kind of modified, and he called it Death Bounce, to Broderbund. And when they wrote him back, they said basically, hey, we really like what you're doing here, but we want some basically original titles. So they sent him a copy of Choplifter. So it's kind of interesting how these two games intersect with Choplifter and Karateka. And I also want to say at this point, I like how they kind of said, hey, we want some original titles. I know a lot of companies today want original titles, even in the retro scene. I remember hearing on the Intellivision Aries, Keith Robinson of Intellivision fame saying that if there was more original homebrew titles for the Intellivision, he could work with those people and maybe get them on future flashbacks or other ventures as well, where if someone's making a homebrew based on an existing property that they don't have the license to, his hands are tied. So one of the things I would like to see more in the retro gaming community is more original homebrew titles. And I think it would really help the homebrew scene to grow and to go beyond just kind of the niche market that is retro gamers, the hardcore retro gamers like you and I, but get out to the general population where they could be included on things like flashback systems because they don't have the licenses to time up. So that's something I'd like to see, especially on the 7800, is more original homebrew titles. But let's go on. So he got Choplifter, and he used some of the graphics that he saw in Choplifter and decided to make a karate game out of it. But he was a film student as well, so he used a lot of inspiration from Akira Kurosawa and some early Disney animated films. And what he wanted to make was a story-based game where the gameplay mechanic was fighting. So the fighting was just used to progress the story. It wasn't the main aspect of the game. And he also really wanted some great animation. So he used rotoscoping, and that's where you take film of a real-life person doing an activity, and then you draw over it to animate it. I believe He-Man and the Masters of the Universe used this as well when they made that cartoon series. If you've ever seen an episode of He-Man, the animation looks a lot different from your traditional animation, especially during the 80s. Now, he took about 2 years to make the game, and he submitted it back to Broderbund when he was a sophomore at Yale. So that was his part-time job. As a part-time job in college, I worked at a Meijer, and I sold video games. He made a video game. Jordan Mechner wins. So the game, of course, came out on the Apple II, was a big success, but it also came out on other systems, including the Commodore 64 and the Atari 8-bits, and I think the Atari XE as well. It was released in Japan on the Famicom, which of course is the Nintendo over in Japan. And the original Game Boy also got a port of it called Master Karateka or Karateka, or however you want to say it. And then later on in 2012, after he was done working on the Prince of Persia movie, yeah, he worked on the Sands of Time Prince of Persia movie. I think he was like a writer. He wrote like the first scripts and is one of the producers. But in 2012, Jordan Mechner got a small team together and they made an updated version, and he changed some of the elements to make it easier. For instance, if your guy died, you didn't have to restart the whole game. You could start over as a different character, but it could change like the ending depending who you ended the game with. And it was more rhythm based, where if you matched your opponent, eventually you would counter attack as well. The graphics look pretty good as well. They're more cartoony, but they still look good from what I could see. So that came out in 2012. Now, originally, the game had a couple Easter eggs. On the Apple II, if you flip the disc upside down and put it in the wrong way, the game would play upside down on the monitor. And this led to some phone calls to customer support where they're like, my game's upside down, what do I do? And they'd say, turn the disc over. And that's kind of humorous to me. And also, I believe if you were in the fighting stance, if you beat the game but you were in the fighting stance when you got to the girl, she would hit you and kill you because she thought you were about to attack her. So you had to be in the walking stance, and we'll get to the stances in a while. But he took that out, I believe, for the 2012 remake. So that is the history of Karateka. Now let's go on to the Atari 7800 version. Karateka was released for the 7800 in 1987. As I said before, it was done by iBid Inc. And the cover art, I believe, is basically a copy of the original computer art, which basically looks like a 3D collector's plate. There's like this, the circle in the background, and within it you can see all these images. It really does look like a collector's plate, except some things are popping out of it. Like you have the floating head of a random samurai, who I believe is in the game, but in the 7800 version, you don't see hats like you did in other versions. You see the castle kind of in the background on top of a mountain with the sun right behind it, like the sun is rising or setting. You can see the damsel who's in distress, who is very much blonde and looks kind of like a supermodel with some extra head jewelry on. And then you can see your dude, who's also blonde, wearing a very white karate outfit and looking straight at you, deadly serious, doing the various karate hand pose. And then there's another version of you as well there. So there's like two of you on this box art doing a kick to another dude in a samurai helmet with a mask on. I believe he might be in the computer versions of the game, but not in the 7800 versions on the game. And you have Super Game Cartridge in a yellow triangle in the corner. On the back, it says Karate Combat, and there is a huge screenshot, and I mean huge. And you can see Mount Fuji in the background and the open blue sky, and you and another guy fighting, except, they flipped it because you are on the wrong side of the screen, but you wouldn't know it. You're doing a karate kick, but it's not making any impact. The other dude's just standing there. So yeah, they flipped this screenshot around. It's a mirror image, if you will, but it looks like a legitimate screenshot. And this is what it says for the description. The evil warlord Akuma destroyed your village and kidnapped Princess Mariko. And that blonde girl does not look like a Mariko. That sounds like more like a Japanese name. You alone can rescue the innocent princess from the tyrant's terrible dungeon. Armed only with your courage and your karate skills, you punch and kick your way past one deadly guard after another into Akuma's stronghold to save your princess, in case you didn't know that already. It is a single-player action game, 6 mighty palace guards to overcome. Use your skill and will to win. Yep, that's right. It actually says that as one of the features, to use your skill and your will to win, because you will need will if you're going to play this game through. For use with the Atari 7800 series systems, for use with the 7800 controllers. Again, the manual, just like Choplifter, is a 4-page folded manual in black and white with a little bit of red mixed in. And of course, the cover is a black and white version of the cover art. And this is what it says inside the manual. This might be the shortest manual in the Atari 7800 library. You've just scaled the treacherous cliff to the castle of Akuma, the evil warlord who burned your village and kidnapped your bride-to-be. Now you must stand before a massive gate. The first of many powerful palace guards block your way. Beyond looms Akuma's palace, where Princess Mariko languishes. You must save her from Akuma's cruel clutches. Your only weapon, karate. Remain calm and focus your will on your goal. That is the way of karateka or karateka. And then it just tells you that you can start up your game. Now, here's the deal. To start the game, actually says this in the manual. Not everyone knows this. You press the select button, which is, I think this might be the only game that you press select to start the game. And you can press select or reset. You can press select to basically do a reset to restart your game, or reset goes back to the title screen. And if you're at the title screen, you don't press select and you press reset, you basically just have to go through the whole credits before you start the game. For playing the game, it says this. You start the game in standing position, facing the first palace guard. The red arrows at the bottom of the screen tell you how many karate hits you can withstand. Each time you get hit, you lose an arrow. When you avoid getting hit, your arrow supply is gradually refilled. If you lose all your arrows, you lose the game. The blue arrows at the bottom right of the screen tell how many karate hits the guard can withstand. And guard is capitalized for whatever reason, so I guess that's his name. His name is Guard. Each time you hit your opponent, he loses an arrow. When he's not getting hit, his arrow supply is refilled. When all blue arrows are gone, your enemy is defeated. You can vary your game difficulty level by using the left switch on the front of your console next to the left controller jack. Pushing the switch to the left decreases the game difficulty. Pushing it to the right increases the game difficulty. So this is one of the few 7800 games that uses the difficulty switch. However, I heard some people say it doesn't really make that much of a difference, but I don't know. The game ends when you defeat all palace guards or when you lose your last arrow. Survival tips. You face the guards one at a time. If you don't fight, your opponent advances to attack you. Each guard has a unique karate skill. The guards get tougher as you move further into the palace. When you defeat an enemy, run forward and face a new opponent. Beware the danger when standing or running. In these positions, you're unprotected. One blow from a guard will destroy you. That says, using your controller to move, punch, or kick, follow the chart. And it shows you a chart that tells you everything you have to do. So here's the deal. You push the right button to assume a fighting stance, and you can also push the right button again to go to standing stance. You start the game in a standing position. If you are ever hit when you're just in the standing position, you die instantaneously. Doesn't matter who it is, you will die. I played one game where I got all the way to the last dude. The bird came and hit me before I got into the fighting stance. My game was over. That was it. So you got to get into the fighting stance as often as you can. And when you go from screen to screen, it changes back to the standing stance. Now, when you're in standing stance, you can run forward by moving the handle right. Now, when you're in fighting stance, if you want to move forward, you can hold the left button and move the handle to the right. And if you just hold it like once or twice, it'll kind of creep forward and then it'll do a leg over leg thing. If you want to retreat, you push the handle to the other way. Now to kick, when you're in fighting stance, you move the handle right. To kick high, you go upper right. To kick down, you kick lower right. Now if you move to the left, so it's away from your enemy, you will actually punch. So you can punch high or low depending if you're diagonally up, down, or if you could do a straight punch by doing it to the left. This takes some getting used to, and the controls are atrocious as far as lag goes. It takes a long time, it feels like, before holding down the button or the controller before it actually does it. And when it does kicks or punches, it does a series, and then it's like your guy has to take a break. The cartridge is a nice, again, color label with the Super Game cartridge yellow on the cartridge in the corner as well. Graphically speaking, I think the game, well, it kind of looks okay. I like Mount Fuji in the background, but it's in every scene, and after a while you can tell it's just sitting there. It's like they stamped it on every screen, and they just kind of moved. Sometimes you're outside, sometimes you're inside. You can see Mount Fuji in the symbol. Your guys all look pretty much the same. A lot of the guards, they change like colors of uniforms a little bit, but there's not a lot to distinguish them like there was in the computer versions of the game, from what I understand. There are some intermissions, and they're basically the same. I think they happen twice during the game where it shows the, Akuma just standing waiting for you and your princess pacing back and forth. I actually think the animation of the princess going back and forth looks really good, especially for a game from this generation. It's something that I would have expected from a 16-bit system like the Genesis or the Super Nintendo. I think the animation shows some promise, and I think the game itself, when your characters move, you can see some of the animation. I think they look pretty good, but sometimes choppy. But it shows some promise and gives you a little bit of an idea of what the 7800 could do. Musically speaking, there really isn't much to this game. There's a very minimalistic sound, kind of a theme song, if you will, at the beginning and ending of the game. It's like ba-ba, 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 and that's about it. And then the sound effects are just really generic. Nothing much going in the music and sound department. Rarity-wise, Atari Age and Digital Press once again agree that this game gets a 2. So just like Choplifter, this is pretty common. Now on eBay, loose copies were going for about $5. Complete copies were going for about 10, and new copies were going for about $15, and as always, that includes shipping. Now, there was only 3 external reviews, which were higher than I thought they would be, for a 64% average. The high score was a 75%, and the low was a 58%. And there was no recordings on the Atari Age High Score Club because there's not really a scoring system in this game. Either you beat it or you don't. There's really not much you can do to this. Now, this is one of those games where I'm pretty sure I had it as a kid, but I don't fully remember for sure. And if I did have it, I know I played it. I can't remember if I had it as a kid or if I bought it when I bought a 7800 during college. But whenever I did have it, I didn't get very far into it. That's for sure. Now, both of these games, Choplifter and Karateka, both appeared in Atarian magazine in all 3 issues in some form or another. In issue 1, they both appeared on the top 10. Choplifter was number 4. And Karateka was number 7, and they beat out games like Centipede and Donkey Kong Jr., so you can wrap your head around that. In the tips and tricks section in issue 1, both games appeared. Karateka appeared for both. Now, this is saying for both the 7800 and XE, and I think the XE version is different. So some of these might only apply to the XE version, but it says, I found that you encounter fewer baddies if you run rather than walk. For example, when walking outside the building, you'll usually meet 6 men, but if you run, you'll only meet 3. And I think this is just the computer version. And that was from Josh in San Rafael, California. Then another Josh, a different one in some city in North Carolina that I can't pronounce. Sorry again. On the 3rd through 5th guards, let them come to you. It makes it much easier to wear them down. Also the 4th and 5th guard. Do a couple high kicks first to drive the vultures away. By the way, those birds that fly, you cannot defeat them in the 7800 version. If you kick, sometimes they will fly over you and not hit you. And if you're moving, sometimes they'll go over you and not hit you as well. But again, I think these hints are more for the computer, the XE version. And for Choplifter, now that says this is for the XE version. So it says, when your helicopter is full of hostages, try flying backwards on your way back. This makes it easier to shoot enemy jets, which usually come from the left. But that might work for the 7800 as well. In issue 2, we have another appearance in the tips and tricks section. Ironically, neither game showed up in the top 10 in issue 2. For Choplifter, in the tips and tricks section, it says, you can sometimes get rid of a tank by flying to it, fly left, and then returning to the barrier of the Atari logo, fly right, and then go get the hostages, fly left. I didn't try that. I don't know how well it works. And that was from Patrick in Rockton, Illinois. There's 2 more tricks. On the second sortie, I found that the best way to avoid the aerial mines that home in on your chopper is to fly at slow speed in the middle of the top of the screen. And that's from Tarek from Los Angeles, California. And then finally, when rescuing hostages, don't land in the bombing position because it slows your takeoff, which must be as fast as possible if the fighter's about to bomb you. And that might explain why I got blown up a lot. And that's from Jeremy in Alberta, California. And that was issue 2. The only Choplifter was in that one. I believe both games appeared in issue 3. Let's see, in the top 10, we have Choplifter at 4 and Karateka at 5. And they beat out Ball Blazer, One-on-One Basketball, Summer Games, Miss Pac-Man, and Tower Toppler for whatever it's worth. Interesting there. And then in the tips and tricks section, we have a hint for Karateka. Again, they label both the 7800 and the XE, but I'm guessing that both of these are going to be for the computer version. Let's see. Right after you enter the temple, you must kill the guard and then walk, not run. When the Falcon attacks, you can take him out with a high kick or high punch. From Charles from APO, New York. And again, that's for the computer version. And then the key to success when battling the guards is to run whenever you get the chance. That way you cover more ground and don't have to battle as many guards, but be very careful because running stance, you are completely defenseless. One well-placed blow will end the game. From Jerome in Sunnyvale, California, which is the home of Atari. And guess what? That again is for the computer version. So not much help there. So there you go. That is Choplifter and Karateka. Let's go on to listener feedback.
Now it's time for listener feedback. This is the part of the show where the listeners come to the rescue. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Over at Atari Age, I posted a thread for feedback on these 2 games, and I asked people to rate the games on the system of 4 choices from best to worst, with the best being a Hall of Fame game. That would be a top 5 officially released game on the system. I don't count homebrews in that. The next would be a solid game, followed by a meh game, and then a bottom 5 game on the system would be called a trash game. So this is what the people over at Atari Age had to say. Toilet Tune said, Karateka or Karateka, however you want to say it, is notoriously bad. The controls are awkward, confusing, and delayed. You have to try to play it to understand. Choplifter is decent, but certain carts don't play nice with certain consoles. The graphics can mess up, which is something I talked about at the beginning of the episode. Retro Gamer 81081 said Choplifter is definitely a solid game, not as good as the Master System version. A simple but addicting game. Karateka? Ha 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 ha. Trash. Game is a compliment. Worst game without a doubt on the system. And worst controlling game of all time. Dark Castle on the Genesis is more fun than that. Wow. Tep392 said, I haven't played Karateka on the 7800 and I haven't played the Apple version since the early 80s, but I remember it being quite laggy. Has anyone played the 7800 and Apple version side by side to compare controls? I'm curious how they compare. And I'm going to guess that some people are going to sound in on that. Then the next guy, Wango Jack, said on a 1 to 5 scale, with 1 as the worst, I give both these games a 1. So I guess he's calling both of these trash games. People like Choplifter, but it is a true failure when compared to the almost every other version of the game. And Karateka just doesn't work. Regarding Choplifter, you might want to try and claim that we should judge a game on its own merits, but this game has been copied over and over from platform to platform. This is exactly the type of game that should be compared, and it compares poorly, primarily because it does everything worse than the other versions. Even the older computer versions had higher difficulty and could not be so easily perfected. Well, I have a hard time perfecting the 7800 version. The game simply ends after 1 round, which is pitiful compared to the Sega Master System version, and the control compared to the other versions is poor. It looks so different that the first time I played it, I thought, oh, it's based on the arcade, which came after the computer version. Except I can't destroy tanks with a straight shot, and I can't figure out what height to position the chopper to even make consistent contact with the ground targets, except the hostages, which I did destroy with great clarity. Even judged on its own, the game does nothing original, and the abrupt ending is what pushes it down from a 2 to a 1, in my opinion. What is this, a demo? Yeah, I can kind of understand it. It's only a single round. And yeah, I can understand how it's in the daytime and the original computer was at the nighttime, but the arcade version and the Sega version was in the daytime, so I could see how that could be confusing. Karateka. I actually tried to play this game and learn the techniques. I think I could get better at beating up the guards, but I doubt I could finish the game. Only a borderline autistic could execute the boring repetition and memorization required to perfectly defeat all the guards and have enough energy to kill the final boss. I don't consider this an accomplishment. It would be like saying, hey, it was tough, but I cleaned up all the cigarette butts on the beach this weekend. The thing that really pushes Karateka down to a 1 is the fact that a bird cannot be defeated in this version. Can it? No, it cannot. I'm sure someone will claim they punch-kicked the bird, but I think it's impossible. It is impossible. It is a stupid enemy to include in the game to be faithful with other versions, and it is broken and obvious mistake that makes the game impossible to enjoy. Well, I wouldn't go... I don't think I would say someone has to be autistic. I know some people who have been able to defeat the game, and I actually got kind of close myself. So, but I think I understand where you're going with that. Gambler172 says, Choplifter is a solid... Karateka is meh. Greetings, Walter. Short and sweet. Nikon said Choplifter. Solid game, tight controls. Parallax scrolling shows off the Maria chip really well. Karateka, another parallax scrolling game that shows off the Maria chip, but the controls have a steep learning curve. But when you get the hang of the controls, it is an alright game. And I give it a meh only because of the stupid bird. I don't know. Would you consider that parallax scrolling? The mountain doesn't ever move at all. It's just there's like no cloud, so I don't know if you truly consider it parallax, but I can kind of understand. Trevor says Choplifter, meh. Based on the original computer Bruderband game and not the arcade game by Sega, what really hurts the title is its length. It's way too short, and unfortunately the replay value goes nearly nil once you have a perfect game, and he puts a link of when he got a perfect game on YouTube. Still, it can be addicting, especially shooting for that perfection goal. Karateka, meh. The game is not horrible. Wow, that's the first person to say that. Just not very good either. Further, playing it on another platform would likely tank the port pretty rapidly for many. Nonetheless, it has its own nuances for specific timings that were perceived as a welcome challenge to me, BITD, which did find me wanting to come back for more. All things considered, both fall short of being solid or trash, respectively. Interesting. Save 2600 says Choplifter is meh, Karateka is trash. Odd, I guess, not considering that they screwed Karateka up as bad as they did. Computer versions, while clunky in their own right, were at least playable and fun at times. 7800 version is not, by any stretch. Blah. Let's see. Bakasama says, Karateka. I got as far as Akuma, then that darn unkillable bird got me and I stopped playing. And I have a similar story to that. Thursday83 says, agreed with Bakasama. Sorry, guys, if I'm saying your screen names wrong, by the way. Is the bird actually killable? No, right? Anywho. Choplifter, solid. Karateka, one of the worst on the system. Disappointing because it's fun on the Apple and the graphics aren't terrible. Needs a control hack. Drac is back, says Karateka is trash. My biggest video game disappointment in history. Pared down brutal joystick control that was unresponsive, needlessly simplified graphics, a hawk that looks like a drunken duck. Could have been great, had no reason to be as bad as it was. Love it on the Apple II and the Atari 8-bits. Choplifter, meh. Found it mildly amusing, but a really limited games in terms of depth. In 1987, this one seemed really out of place relative to what my NES friends were playing. So Blazer, who does the SNES podcast, said Choplifter is solid for me. One of my old-time favorite computer games. I played the heck out of the Commodore 64 version as a kid. This is a very good port of the original computer game, marred only by the awful controller. Some people have mentioned it's not as good as the Sega Master System version. Well, duh, that was based off the Sega arcade version of the game, which was designed to be superior anyways. It's not fair to compare them. I think the arcade Sega Master System version of the game is better also, but we're talking ports of the original computer game, and taken in that light, the 7800 version is very good. Karateka is a trash game. Where do I even begin to rag on this version? Controls, graphics, sound, hit detection, enemies, faithfulness to the original computer version. In all of those areas, it just stinks. I really like the original computer version also, but I don't feel any of the ports of the game came out well. They shouldn't have even tried to bring this over to the 7800 version. It's a really WTF game on the system for collectors only. And WTF, for those who don't know, stands for What the Flip. Jink says Choplifter, boring game, could have been better. I can't finish it. The planes easily shoot me down. I'm with you there. Those planes come out of nowhere and just hit me before I can react. Karateka is a crud game, should have never been made with the controls so slow. Reminded me of Hero's Quest on the Tandy 1000 in the fighting sequences. Pressing thrust, and 3 seconds later your character stabs at a monster. Major Tom Coming Home says, I never played the 7800 Choplifter, but I had Karateka as a kid. At the time, I found it to be meh, okay occasionally, but frustrating. In hindsight, I think that is a generous review for a lousy game. In those days, I didn't have an NES, and Karateka was the closest thing I had to something like Contra or Double Dragon. Actually, I think if I had played Contra or Double Dragon on the NES at a friend's house, there would have been no way I could have gone back to playing Karateka. Besides Karateka, the only 7800 games I had were arcade ports like Asteroids and Joust, and the first time I saw the Nintendo games, it blew my mind. The sad part is that the 7800 was quite capable console in its own right, but it never reached its full potential. Castlevania on the 7800 with a Poke chip might have been quite interesting and quite possible. Very interesting. Austin says, I place Choplifter in meh territory. It's a solid playing game. Doesn't look horrible either, but it's just one level. Beat it and the game ends. The only objective is to try and do it faster, and I didn't find that very engaging. Karateka is easily trash category. I doubt many will disagree with that. Classic Pack. Well, I played both, and I have to give Karateka a 1 rating. It's horrible. The graphics are okay, but the controls are just horrible. I can't even imagine how you finish the game. On the other hand, I will give Choplifter a 6, so I guess he's going on a scale from 1 to 10. Solid gameplay, plenty of action, not overly hard. I don't mean it's easy. It's just that I hate games that are filled with cheap shots. Choplifter has very few of these, thankfully. If you keep your eye on what's going on around you, they can be avoided. Unless you're me, then the plane gets you, and I felt like it was a cheap shot. Sean says Choplifter, solid. Karateka is a hunk of junk. You need a new designation for games as bad as Karateka. Well, I think trash is bad enough. Greg2600 says Choplifter is fine, but Karateka is one of the worst video games ever released. Really a shame because the arcade version is a fantastic game. I guess you're referring to Choplifter because Karateka did not come out in the arcade. Maybe he's thinking of Karate Champ. Lynx Pro said Choplifter is fun. What hurts is the recycled sound effects of the 2600 combat. Oh, I didn't pick up on that. Karateka isn't impossible to beat, but you might kill a pro line in doing so, as I did back then. And he said a nice homebrew task would be improve 7800 Karateka's controls while adding back the rest of the game from the computer versions and with Pokey audio. Okay, now let's head over to my email bag over at Atari7800podcast at AOL.com. That's Atari7800podcast at AOL.com. I got another email from Faro, and he starts out saying about the other systems that he moved on to, and he said there was many. I did end up getting an NES, which was a really fun system. Shortly after I got a part-time job at the local Ramshorn restaurant and started buying pretty much any new console that came out. And by the way, I know what Ramshorn is because I grew up probably within a half hour or so of where Faro grew up. So I don't see those down where I live now, but I do remember Ramshorn up in Michigan. Over the years and a few different part-time jobs while in junior high and high school, I bought a used Game Boy, a Sega Genesis, a Lynx, a Game Gear, an SNES, a Sega CD, a 32X. After high school, while going to college, I got a pretty good job working for Coca-Cola. So I got into the higher price consoles. 3DO, Saturn, PS1, Dreamcast, N64, PS2, original Xbox, PS3, Wii, 3DS, Xbox 360, and a few retro consoles thrown in between. But the only two original consoles from my childhood that I still own are the 7800 and the Genesis, which is very interesting because after the 7800, I went to a Genesis too. I wonder how many 7800 people went to a Genesis after that. All the other ones were traded or sold for the next best system. Years later, I bought most of them back, excluding the Sega CD, 3DO, Lynx, Game Gear, Game Boy, and 32X. So let's talk about Ball Blazer. As you know, I just bought that game a few weeks ago. I did have it back about 8 or so years ago when I started recollecting retro games, but got rid of it soon after. Why? Well, I didn't understand the game. I didn't understand how to play it. Now I have it again, and thanks to YouTube, I do get it. But honestly, I think it's just okay. No way a Hall of Fame game. I would say it's solid. Well, that's fair enough. Desert Falcon is another game I picked up 8 or so years back. It's a game that I really wanted back during that time, but never had a chance to pick up. Honestly, I think if I had this game as a kid, I would have really loved it. But, well, it's just okay. I really can't get into it, but I would still give it a solid. It's not a bad game, just not one I would choose with my limited playing time. Well, maybe that would be more like a meta game for you. Choplifter is one of my original games. My buddy Mick and I loved playing it. Now, this is one of those games that I loved as a child, but not so much now. I didn't notice this as a kid, but there really isn't much to the game. It's just one long screen. A few people get saved, a few die, that's about it. Regardless, I do have fond memories of this game, and this is going to be strange, but I'm going to go ahead and give it a Hall of Famer. LOL. Interesting. You're just all over the map with your ratings. I don't know what to, even after I hear your descriptions, I don't know where you're going. Karateka, which I can't say for the life of me. That's another original game of mine. The game used to make me so mad. I hated it, but I just kept coming back for more. The controls stunk at the time, but I really didn't know that. And the game was so freaking hard. I don't think I ever got past the 4th or maybe 5th screen. Maybe. I really didn't hate the game. I actually really liked it, and now I realize the controls were just bad. But I do have great memories of the game. I don't think anyone else will give it this, but I'm going Hall of Fame for this one too. And he says that Faro is exactly how you say his name. So Faro, that's far out. I bet you never heard that joke before, have you? So there you go. You make me laugh, dude. All right, so let's see. Got another email from Richard. And he said, I had both of these games back then. Choplifter I liked a lot because I loved helicopters, which is why the guy originally programmed it. It was a challenging game because it was hard for me maybe to land the chopper right. I remember flattening a hostage way too many times, but I know I achieved a perfect score once or twice. Wow. I recently played the ColecoVision version of this game on the ColecoVision Flashback. I liked the 7800 version, even though the ColecoVision version has multiple skill levels better for two reasons. First, I like the daytime setting on 7800, and second, while people may dislike the 7800 Pro line controller, the ColecoVision controller is easily the worst. I can't play with the flashback controller for more than 10 minutes or my left hand will get cramped like something else. He says a very solid game. Well, I will say this, I have a ColecoVision flashback. I did dabble a little bit in the Choplifter when I first got it. I haven't since. But those controllers are not exactly the original controllers, but the original controllers do get dissed a lot. So, I can see people thinking that even if it was the original ColecoVision controller, I've heard lots of bad things about the flashback controller. Karateka, on the other hand, is a mess. The graphics are fine. I couldn't figure the controls out. My older brother Tom did a little better, but we both agree that the controls killed the game. Trash all the way. From last week's episode, Ballblazer is a Hall of Famer, and Desert Falcon I only played on the 2600, and the 2600 version is mess, so I'll give the 7800 version a mad too. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Richard. I will try my best. Let's see. I was talking to Edladdin about the Super Twin joystick, and in between discussions about it, he actually gave me some feedback for Desert Falcon, Ballblazer, Choplifter, and Karateka. And he said he was feeling guilty about not providing feedback about the first two in time for last show, but it actually worked out much better since hearing the show cleared up a couple key misunderstandings he had about each game. So I'm glad that worked out for you. Yeah, if you ever have feedback for old games that I covered, send it in, please. I don't care if you're late. With Desert Falcon, I liked the graphics and music, but I could not get the flow of the gameplay at all, nor how to use the hieroglyphics. I was never a big Zaxxon fan, so I was preparing to relegate this to a meh column. But after hearing the show, I spent some more time with the game, and I got much farther than before and had a much better time with it. It still suffers from having no way to judge the height when flying, but I give it extra love for being an original game and not a tired arcade title. So new judgment, salad. And I will say this too, if you're a first timer picking up Desert Falcon, I would say try it on the novice level and also memorize a couple hieroglyphic combinations to go after. For me, it was bird, cane, bowl for the warp. That was my favorite. And try it there. And also this. When you're first playing Desert Falcon, stick either way to the top of the screen as far as the height goes or right on the ground. The kind of in the middle range is really hard, I found. So that's what I'd say, at least to start out with. Okay, Ed goes on. With Ballblazer, the bride and I played enough to know that this game was solid, bordering on Hall of Fame, but I still didn't quite get how the 90-degree turning worked. That you always face the ball and then the goal. So the other night I played against the droids for the first time and was able to kick butt until I got to number 5, and after that it was give and take. And I think that's around where, I think number 6 is right where I have the most challenge. Choplifter is a mixed bag. If I had only had first come to this game from the Apple II version, the 7800 version would look like a big improvement. I would probably be pretty happy, but I first played Choplifter in the little arcade in the University of Georgia Student Center back in 1986, along with Spy Hunter and Cheyenne. Choplifter was the game I played a lot. Gorgeous graphics, a driving soundtrack, multiple levels, and a great feel to the flying. Pretty much only the flying survived to the 7800 port, and it's more good than great. Still, it's a challenge to get enough of those little guys back to headquarters to win the game, and I keep going back to play it. So despite how pathetic this version is compared to the arcade, I still have to give this a solid rating. Karateka is the first game that I have the trash rating. The opening drags on forever. Hit the select button and you'll skip it. That's kind of confusing because, a lot of games you hit the fire button or you hit the reset, but no, hit the select button, you'll skip it. So long to get to the fighting, and then the control is so awful. I got this game in a lot with the 7800 console and now have it in a box of stuff to put back up on eBay. I don't think it's worth the limited space I have to store and display cards. Bad game. Okay, take care, buddy. Best wishes, Ed, and take care yourself and keep up the good work over at edladdin.com. And remember, if you use the code Ferg, as far as I know, it still gives you 10% off your order. And I recommend everyone at least get the Seagull 78 adapter, which lets you use Sega Genesis controllers with the 7800 2-button games. And it greatly improves because now it's so hard to go back to the Proline controller after using a Sega Genesis controller. I'll say that much. And let's see. And I had some, Steven, I got your feedback on Water Ski. I will save it for the next episode when I go over those two games. And let's see. Now it's time for everyone's favorite part. That's right. It's time for another episode of Shinto Says. And I was just wondering, Shinto, I wonder if he's related to Shinobi, maybe. I don't know. He is a mysterious dude. So anyways, Shinto?
The first time we had seen or played Choplifter, it was on the Atari 7800, and we loved it. The helicopter was big and looked cool, and it tilted realistically when moving forward, just like a red and white Airwolf. The graphics had a bit of parallax scrolling, and the controls worked pretty well too. What we didn't like was how the enemies could appear out of nowhere, just off the visible screen while you were packing your chopper full of people like some type of airborne clown car. There were nice little touches here and there, like the people waving and the old stars and stripes flying back at your base. It sounded a bit like combat. Alright, it sounded a lot like combat, but at least it looked good. Then we played it on our friend's Sega Master System. It was totally different and totally wrong, in our opinion. The chopper was smaller, there was music, multiple levels, and lots of flicker. The 7800 version was obviously superior. Except it wasn't, since compared to the arcade game, the Master System was much, much closer. I'm big enough to admit that now. Sorry, Fred, you are right. Your version of Choplifter is better than ours. Except for the flicker. We always wondered what would happen if you managed to save all 64 people, but we never found out. The closest my brother was able to get was 61 saved in 1989, but I managed to beat that in 2008 with 62 saved. Where's my fanfare? Ah, there it is. Glad I kept that around. I'm going to rank Choplifter solid, though not a very high solid. Of all the ports of Choplifter that don't seem to try to be the arcade game, this is probably the best. It's fun and challenging, if a bit unfair at times, and it looks great. I may never rescue all 64 people, but I'm pretty sure that nothing special happens when you do, so I won't worry too much about that. But you know what I do want to save, what I've always wanted to save? The beautiful Princess Mariko. So beautiful and so sad. We just have to rescue her, we've got to. And we tried, oh man did we try. The problem? Karateka on the Atari 7800 is unbelievably frustrating. You have to start punching or kicking well in advance, and you can only throw 5 blows at a time, whether or not they land before you get super winded or something and have to take a break. Positioning yourself so that you can actually hit your opponent is tedious, and while the walking animation looks nice, it leaves you vulnerable for far too long. I don't know, I personally would stop my fancy footwork when I'm being punched in the face. I don't know about you. It's all too slow and unresponsive. You're not fighting someone, you're outlasting them, counting on them to give up in the middle of their 5-hit attack sequence and let you complete yours. That's the only way you win. And as their initial advantage grows, as they get more triangles, you can't really outlast them anymore. And one of them has a pet bird that comes in and starts hitting you. I think my brother landed 1 hit on that bird once. It's just too hard to react that fast. I haven't played Karateka on any other platform, but from looking at YouTube videos, the others are much faster. The Atari ST version in particular looks pretty awesome. It looks fast and actually fun to play. But 7800, I don't know what went wrong there. The high score binder shows that my brother got down to 3 triangles remaining on the brown opponent. This was June 2nd, 1990. That's the closest we ever got to saving the poor princess, and I'm pretty sure I haven't played the game since around that time. You know, I was originally thinking I wouldn't hand out any trash ratings, but the more I think about it, and the more the memories come back, memories of utter frustration, yeah, this is going to have to get a trash rating from me. I'm sorry, Princess, I really am. I would have saved you if I could.
And this is the part of the podcast where I tell Shinto how he should get his own podcast, because that's what every podcaster says nowadays whenever they get a submission from Shinto. But I also appreciate just what he does in this little community, just sending in his memories. And there's something to be said about that. Just the time you take doing that for both the 2600 podcast and the 5200 podcast. And I don't know if you're on other podcasts as well. It wouldn't surprise me, but you do have some great memories. The high score binder, keeping the how many triangles you had, what color guy. That's crazy. Oh, and you get 10 extra points for referencing Airwolf. So way to go there. And yeah, the Sega Master System does have a lot of flicker. That's one thing that, for the most part, the 7800, you don't see a lot of flicker. It really could handle a lot of sprites at the same time. So, man, Shinto, thanks again. Greatly, greatly appreciate that. And wow, he trashed the game. What about that? So, okay, now it's my turn to weigh in. I'm going to remember to weigh in this week. So let's see. Choplifter is first. And I plugged in Choplifter when I got it on my working 7800, and to be honest with you, I was looking forward to it, but I just really struggled with it, especially with the cheap hits. It seems now when I play the game, it seems like the way it's programmed is that after you rescue so many hostages, like the first building, then they add another enemy, like the jet planes, and then the air mines. Like they add enemies throughout the game, the further you get into rescuing hostages. So it might be advantageous to rescue the far camp first. But what I found was just a lot of frustration with those jet planes. I had a lot of... I don't know if it's a TV I was playing on or if it's just because my reflexes maybe aren't that great, but the plane by the time I saw the plane on the screen, I already blew up even though I started to ascend. So I just had a frustrating time. I don't think I got through a day. I think I lost all my lives before I could save any of enough of the passengers, get all the barracks open. So I just didn't have a good time with that. And I'm going to rate this a meh, because there is a little bit of enjoyment. I think if I had this growing up, I think maybe if I got used to it, I might have enjoyed it more. Maybe the rating would have went up to a solid, but I just didn't enjoy it. I'm sorry, I just didn't. And I played, and then after I played it, I played the Sega Master System version, which I know is based on the arcade game. It's a port of a port. But if you want a helicopter action game, flicker aside, go with the Sega Master System version. It controlled much better, and it was just more enjoyable. And I want to be an honest host, not one of these guys who comes on and says why their version of the game is the best version of the game. I will tell you that Ball Blazer, if you want to play Ball Blazer, play it on the 7800. But if you want to play Choplifter, go to the Sega Master System. Yes, it's based on the arcade version, but there's just a lot more to do, and it was just more enjoyable. I actually want to play that game again. I don't want to play the Choplifter on the 7800, but I think I'm going to try. I'm going to see if I can get a little better on that. All right, so Karateka. I was ready to go into this game to throw it in the trash without even playing it again. And it's been a long time since I played it. So here's what happened. The controls are horrible, but I started to get used to them. I started to get a little bit used to the patterns. And I think, is there 6 guys? So one time I actually got to Akuma. I actually got to the last guy. For the longest time, I continuously died on the level when they introduced the bird, which I think is the 4th warrior. I constantly would die on him. But then I don't know how it happened, and I'll tell you this: I rely a lot on the high kicks. But then I got into a rhythm, or I got lucky, and I was able to get it all the way to Akuma. But then the frustration set in, because in Karateka, when you start out on any screen, it doesn't matter if you walk or run, you start out in the running position, which means if you get one hit, you're dead. And I was so excited to get to Akuma that I was like, oh wow, I'm actually there. The bird came in, and I started fumbling with the controller, forgetting which button was to get into the fighting position, and the bird killed me before I could even attack the final guy. And I was like, oh, you're kidding me. And since then, I've gone back a few times, and I haven't been able to replicate it. I haven't been able to get that far again. And I'm going to say this. It's a trash game, but there's a chance I might find 5 games that I'd rather trash than this game. So far, I'd rather play Karateka than Title Match Pro Wrestling. Now, if I had a second player, that might be a different story. But most of my gaming single player experience, so that's how I look at it. I'd rather play Karateka than Hat Trick, because Hat Trick was just so choppy and it's almost too easy. Karateka, there's a challenge, and I feel like I could actually beat the game if I got just the right amount of luck on my side. I think I might be able to take it down. So I think I'm going to keep going back to Karateka a few more times. Now, it might be what I'm having trouble with now is the green dude right before Akuma. I'm having a lot of trouble getting past him. So it might be that he keeps taking me down. I just say forget it. And I wouldn't recommend anyone play Karateka. But I would say that if you do decide to play it with an open mind, get ready for the delayed reactions where you hit the button and you have to hold it down and wait, and know that you have to be in the fighting stance. Use high kicks a lot. You might actually get a little bit of enjoyment out of this game. I'm not going to go far crazy and say it's Hall of Fame. I'm still giving it the trash rating. But if I find some other games that I think deserve trash more than that, I might bump this up to a meh. And for Karateka, that's huge. So there you go. That's my thoughts on those two games, Karateka and Choplifter. This is probably the worst pair of games I reviewed so far. Let's see. The one episode I did Hat Trick and Winter Games. Winter Games has more is a really good game. Hat Trick was not. So yeah, this is the worst two. Hopefully this will be the worst two lot combined. We shall see as we go on. So that's those two games. So that wraps up our show. Remember, you can find the Atari 7800 Game by Game podcast at iTunes. Now I'm also on Stitcher. I believe you can leave reviews on both of them if you wish. If you want to help out the show a little bit, you can feel free to do that. And I also put these shows on YouTube. I don't do anything fancy. I add a few pictures, just a handful of pictures here and there. No video, because it's just such a long thing to put onto YouTube. It takes a long time to just get my computer to make it into video form and then put it on YouTube. So I don't do a lot with it, but some people evidently like to listen to it that way. Maybe it works better on your phone or your computer. Or you just like to stream it in the background that way. You can find that on YouTube as well. Speaking of YouTube, I do a show called The No Swear Gamer. I've currently passed 150 episodes. One of the things I did recently was I beat Pitfall, and I put a walkthrough video of me beating Pitfall, getting to the kill screen up there. I also did a review of the Atari 7800 system, which if you listen to episode 1 of the podcast, you'll know a whole lot more from that than the video review. This is not as much depth, but still a cool little review. And I put reviews for other games, for other systems like the Sega Genesis and the Nintendo and so on and so forth. Just dropped one for Desert Falcon. And I will be working on one for Ball Blazer, which I did in the last episode. And got a Nintendo game coming up. I think I'm going to do Star Force coming up real soon as well. So you can check that out. I would totally appreciate if you went over to YouTube and checked out my channel. So what's coming up next on the podcast? Well, the next episode 11, is going to cover the Froggo games, Take Command, and Water Ski. And what I would like to do is, if you have not sent in any listener feedback yet for any of the previous games, or just a general, 7800 memory, what was it like the first time you got the system, please send them in, because I really don't know how many people are going to send in submissions to these games. They're really obscure. Not a lot of people bought them when they first came out. Not a lot of people even have them even today. But if you do have any feedback on Water Ski or Tank Command, it would be awesome if you send it. So go ahead and send that to Atari7800podcast at AOL.com. That's Atari7800podcast at AOL.com. You can also see me sometimes at some of the forum sites I visit. The Retro League, one of the first ones, one of the friends of the show there. And some of my other friends of the show include Atari.io. They have a forums over there. I'm also at Atari Age, and another friend from across the pond, retrovideogamer.co.uk. That's retrovideogamer.co.uk. They all have some great forum sites for classic retro video game fans. So after episode 11, episode 12 will cover touchdown football and 101 basketball. And then episode 13 will cover summer games and Super Huey. So again, if you have feedback for those games or any games I covered, send them in. I would appreciate that. Thank you guys for giving me some time today. Remember, games are fun, but always keep first things first. I will see you next time.
You have been listening to the Atari 7800 Game by Game podcast. But you already knew that, didn't you? The Atari 7800 Game by Game podcast is part of the Retro Junkies network. Blah blah blah, copyright 2015 blah blah blah. I really need to find a better job. I wonder if Ferg is hiring.
I hope Ferg's not listening, because I know he hates that whole back in the thing.
BITD.